Lady Vivienne's mirrors were mesmerizing to look at yourself in, but once you entered, finding the way out was impossible. Each reflection drew you deeper and pulled you away from the real world. Let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you in the comments. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from all corners of the world. Now prepare yourself for a story that will make you question every reflection you see. And let's begin our journey together tonight. The gaslight flickered across the polished surfaces of Reflection Gallery as Lady Vivienne Ashford adjusted the final mirror in what would become London's most dangerous exhibition space. Her establishment occupied 3 floors of a Georgian townhouse in Mayfair, each room carefully designed to showcase mirrors that seemed to capture not just images but souls themselves. At 34, Vivienne possessed an otherworldly beauty that seemed enhanced by constant exposure to her own creations. Her dark hair appeared to hold depths that ordinary light could never reveal, while her violet eyes reflected angles and perspectives that defied normal optical laws. The gallery itself had been designed as a temple to reflection, with each mirror positioned according to mathematical principles that Vivienne had spent years perfecting. Visitors entered through an antechamber lined with conventional-looking glasses that seemed innocent enough, but as they progressed deeper into the exhibition, the mirrors became increasingly complex and disorienting. Some showed multiple reflections that moved independently of their viewers, while others seemed to capture images that remained visible long after the original subject had moved away. Vivienne's reputation as London's premier mirror craftsman had been built upon her ability to create optical effects that bordered on the supernatural. Wealthy clients competed for her custom pieces, paying astronomical sums for mirrors that transformed their homes into spaces where beauty seemed enhanced and reality took on dreamlike qualities. Society hostesses claimed that guests looked more attractive in Vivienne's mirrors, while portrait painters sought her consultation on pieces that would flatter their subjects beyond what natural reflection could achieve. But it was the gallery's centerpiece that truly demonstrated Vivienne's genius, a collection she privately called the Infinite Chamber. This was a circular room where dozens of mirrors had been arranged according to precise angles that created the illusion of endless space stretching in all directions. Visitors who entered this chamber found themselves surrounded by reflections that seemed to extend into infinity, creating a sensation of floating in a void where the boundaries between self and reflection dissolved completely. Duchess Catherine Pemberton had been among Vivienne's most enthusiastic patrons, her passion for beautiful objects matched only by her competitive desire to possess items that other wealthy women could not acquire. The Duchess had commissioned a series of mirrors for her country estate, requesting pieces that would create magical effects in her private chambers where she conducted her morning beauty rituals. The consultation process for the Duchess's commission had taken place in Vivienne's private workshop, a space hidden behind the public gallery where she created her most sophisticated pieces. The Duchess had been fascinated by the complex optical calculations involved in creating mirrors that could manipulate perspective and enhance natural beauty, while Vivienne had carefully studied her client's personality and psychology to design effects that would prove irresistibly compelling. The mirrors that Vivienne had created for Duchess Catherine were masterpieces of optical engineering that went far beyond mere vanity accessories. Each piece incorporated subtle distortions that made the viewer appear younger, more beautiful, and somehow more vivid than normal reflection could achieve. The angles had been calculated to create hypnotic effects that made prolonged viewing addictive, while hidden mechanisms allowed the mirrors to shift and change their reflective properties in ways that seemed magical to those who witnessed them. The final fitting appointment that would claim the Duchess's freedom had been scheduled for a quiet Tuesday afternoon, when the gallery was closed to other visitors. Vivienne had insisted on personally overseeing the installation of the Duchess's mirrors, explaining that their complex optical properties required precise positioning that only she could achieve. The Duchess had arrived eagerly, excited to experience the full effect of her expensive commission. The tragedy that befell Duchess Catherine remained a mystery that baffled investigators for months. She had entered Reflection Gallery accompanied by her lady's maid, who had waited in the antechamber while her mistress proceeded to the workshop for her private consultation. The maid had heard normal conversation for approximately an hour, followed by exclamations of delight that suggested the Duchess was pleased with Vivienne's work. But when the appointment time had elapsed and the Duchess failed to emerge from the workshop, concerned inquiries had revealed that Vivienne was also nowhere to be found. A thorough search of the gallery had discovered no trace of either woman, though the Duchess's personal effects remained in the workshop, and the mirrors she had commissioned were arranged as if for immediate installation. The investigation that followed had involved Scotland Yard's most experienced detectives, who examined every inch of the gallery while searching for secret passages or hidden chambers that might explain the mysterious disappearances. The building's architecture was thoroughly documented, revealing no concealed spaces large enough to hide human beings, while interviews with neighbors had produced no witnesses who had seen either woman leave the premises. Most puzzling of all was the condition of the workshop where the Duchess had last been seen. The mirrors arranged for her commission remained in perfect condition, positioned as if waiting for installation, while Vivienne's tools and materials showed no signs of disturbance. The only unusual detail was a subtle disorientation that investigators experienced when spending extended time in the workshop, a sensation that the room was somehow larger than its physical dimensions should have allowed. The official conclusion reached by the Metropolitan Police was that both women had somehow left the gallery through an exit that had not been identified during the investigation, possibly fleeing together after some incident that had frightened them both. This theory gained credence when no bodies were discovered despite exhaustive searches, while the absence of any signs of struggle suggested that whatever had occurred had not involved violence. But the truth behind the Duchess's disappearance was far more sinister and impossible than any investigator could have imagined. Lady Vivienne had not fled the gallery. She had never left at all. Instead, she continued to inhabit the building through methods that transcended conventional understanding of space and reality, moving through dimensions that existed between reflections, where she could observe and manipulate visitors without being seen herself. The Duchess, meanwhile, had become a permanent resident of the optical prison that Vivienne had constructed within her mirror systems. Catherine remained conscious and aware, trapped in a labyrinth of reflections where she could see and hear the real world, but could never again interact with it directly. Her attempts to communicate with the outside world were perceived only as unusual lighting effects or brief glimpses of movement that observers dismissed as tricks of the eye. The reopening of Reflection Gallery under new management had been justified by the absence of any evidence that crimes had been committed on the premises. The mirrors and optical displays remained exactly as Vivienne had arranged them, creating exhibitions that continued to attract visitors who marveled at effects that seemed to demonstrate capabilities beyond what conventional craftsmanship could achieve. Lady Margaret Ashford had been among the first customers to visit the reopened gallery, her fascination with optical illusions having drawn her to examine mirrors that promised to reveal beauty in ways that ordinary reflection could never match. Margaret had been particularly intrigued by the infinite chamber, spending nearly an hour studying reflections that seemed to show her multiple selves existing in parallel dimensions. The transformation that had begun during Margaret's visit had been so gradual that she initially attributed the changes to lighting effects or her own imagination. Her reflection had started to move independently, reaching toward the mirror's surface, while her physical body remained stationary. Other reflections had appeared that showed her in different clothing, different poses, and eventually in entirely different settings that seemed more real than the gallery where her body stood transfixed. Margaret's disappearance had followed the same pattern as the Duchess's, with concerned friends finding the gallery empty despite clear evidence that she had entered but never left. The investigation had been perfunctory, as authorities had no new evidence to pursue and Margaret's family had been reluctant to create scandal through prolonged public inquiry into circumstances that seemed to offer no hope of resolution. But Margaret had joined the Duchess in Vivienne's collection of reflection prisoners, conscious beings trapped in optical dimensions where they could observe reality but never again participate in it directly. Their awareness remained intact, enabling them to see new visitors entering the gallery and to understand with growing horror that they were witnessing the same trapping process that had claimed their own freedom. As London's social season continued, Reflection Gallery had become known as a place where visitors sometimes experienced profound transformations, emerging from their visits with new perspectives on beauty and reality that seemed to enhance their appreciation for aesthetic experiences. The gallery's reputation for providing unique encounters had attracted increasingly sophisticated clients whose wealth and influence protected the establishment from scrutiny that might have revealed its deadly secrets. Lady Vivienne continued to operate through her mirror network, no longer constrained by physical form but possessing enhanced capabilities that enabled her to create optical effects that transcended natural laws. Her consciousness existed in the spaces between reflections, allowing her to manipulate what visitors saw while remaining invisible to conventional observation. The perfect prison that she had constructed within her mirror systems represented the ultimate achievement in both optical engineering and psychological manipulation. Her victims remained eternally beautiful in their reflected state, never aging or deteriorating, while providing Vivienne with an ever-growing audience for exhibitions that showcased her mastery over perception and reality. The gallery's success had proven that the most effective traps were those that appeared to offer exactly what their victims most desired: perfect beauty, enhanced self-perception, and experiences that transcended ordinary limitations. Vivienne had discovered that people would voluntarily enter prisons that promised to fulfill their deepest vanities, making her work a collaborative effort between predator and prey. The origins of Vivienne's transformation from skilled craftswoman to architect of dimensional imprisonment could be traced to her studies at Cambridge, where her exceptional mathematical abilities had earned her access to advanced courses in optical physics that few women of her generation were permitted to pursue. Her professor, Dr. Edmund Blackwood, had recognized in her not only rare intellectual gifts, but also an obsessive fascination with the psychological effects of reflection that suggested possibilities for research that conventional academic constraints would never allow. The private tutorials that Dr. Blackwood had conducted with his most promising student had covered theoretical territories that official university courses could never address, including investigations into how optical illusions could influence human consciousness and behavior in ways that approached psychological manipulation. These sessions had taken place in his personal laboratory, where equipment capable of creating complex light patterns and reflective surfaces had enabled experiments that pushed the boundaries of what contemporary science considered possible. Vivienne's doctoral research had focused on what she termed dimensional optics, the theoretical possibility that mirrors could serve as gateways between different layers of reality that existed in parallel to the conventional three-dimensional world. Her mathematical models had suggested that properly configured reflective surfaces could create access points to spatial dimensions where normal physical laws operated differently, enabling effects that would appear supernatural to ordinary observation. The breakthrough that would shape Vivienne's entire approach to mirror construction had come through understanding that human perception of reality was far more malleable than conventional wisdom acknowledged. By manipulating the angle, intensity, and frequency of reflected light, it was possible to create optical environments where visitors would experience profound alterations in their sense of space, time, and even personal identity. Vivienne's first successful experiments with dimensional manipulation had been conducted using laboratory mice that provided opportunities to test various optical configurations while developing expertise in creating controlled alterations to perception and behavior. Her research had revealed that properly designed mirror systems could create spatial distortions that trapped subjects in localized reality bubbles where they remained conscious, but lost all ability to navigate back to conventional dimensional space. The theoretical foundation for her later mirror labyrinth had been established through careful study of how reflection and refraction could be used to create infinite regression effects that overwhelmed normal spatial orientation. By arranging mirrors according to precise mathematical relationships, she could create chambers where the boundaries between real space and reflected space became impossible for visitors to distinguish, effectively trapping them in optical illusions that felt more real than reality itself. The transition from academic research to practical application had required establishing workshops where Vivienne could construct mirror systems that incorporated her theoretical discoveries while maintaining the appearance of conventional decorative objects. Her reputation as a skilled craftswoman had provided perfect cover for creating pieces that served purposes far beyond mere aesthetic enhancement. The first human subject to experience Vivienne's dimensional trapping techniques had been her research assistant, Mary Whitmore, whose curious nature and technical knowledge had made her both valuable and dangerous to Vivienne's increasingly secretive experiments. Mary had volunteered to test what she believed was a harmless optical illusion device, never suspecting that the mirror chamber she entered would become her permanent prison. Mary's imprisonment had been achieved through a mirror configuration that created what Vivienne termed a reflection loop, an optical environment where the subject's image bounced between carefully positioned mirrors in patterns that created the illusion of infinite space, while actually confining them to a dimensional pocket from which escape was impossible. Mary remained conscious and aware within this reflection prison, able to observe the laboratory but unable to communicate with or influence the outside world. The success of Mary's imprisonment had confirmed that Vivienne's theoretical models could be translated into practical applications that achieved complete control over human subjects, while maintaining perfect concealment from outside observation. Mary's disappearance had been attributed to a family emergency that required her immediate departure from Cambridge, while her continued presence in Vivienne's mirror system provided valuable data about long-term effects of dimensional imprisonment. The psychological aspects of Vivienne's trapping methods had proven to be as important as the optical components, requiring understanding of how victims' expectations and desires could be manipulated to ensure their willing participation in their own imprisonment. She had learned to create mirror experiences that appeared to fulfill subjects' deepest wishes, while actually drawing them into dimensional traps from which they could never escape. The refinement of her techniques had involved extensive experimentation with different mirror configurations and lighting systems that could create increasingly sophisticated illusions of space, depth, and alternative reality. Some arrangements created the impression of vast chambers that extended far beyond the physical boundaries of actual rooms, while others generated the appearance of parallel worlds where visitors could see improved versions of themselves living enhanced lives. The establishment of reflection gallery had required constructing mirror systems that could operate continuously without maintenance, while serving multiple functions that appeared completely innocent to casual observation. The gallery's public displays provided cover for more sinister activities that took place in hidden chambers where Vivienne's most sophisticated trapping devices remained concealed from visitors who were not selected for permanent residency. The selection criteria that Vivienne used to identify suitable victims had been refined through careful observation of gallery visitors, whose personalities and circumstances made them ideal candidates for dimensional imprisonment. Wealthy women with strong vanity and limited family connections were preferred, as their disappearances would attract minimal investigation, while their personalities made them susceptible to optical manipulations that exploited their desires for enhanced beauty and social status. The most sophisticated aspect of Vivienne's mirror labyrinth was its integration of multiple trapping systems that could operate simultaneously while maintaining the illusion that visitors were experiencing voluntary and beneficial encounters with advanced optical technology. The gallery's design enabled her to guide selected victims through sequential stages of psychological conditioning that prepared them for final imprisonment, while ensuring their enthusiastic cooperation throughout the process. The expansion of her operations beyond individual imprisonments to encompass systematic collection of victims had required developing production methods that could generate sufficient mirror systems to support multiple simultaneous trapping operations while maintaining the quality standards necessary to ensure reliable results. Her workshop had evolved from research facility to manufacturing center capable of creating optical prisons that could house dozens of subjects while remaining completely invisible to outside observation. The integration of her optical expertise with psychological manipulation techniques had enabled Vivienne to create a criminal enterprise that operated within the legitimate art and crafts industry, while serving purposes that transcended conventional understanding of imprisonment and control. Her success had demonstrated that the most effective forms of captivity were those that appeared to be beneficial experiences that fulfilled victims' deepest desires while actually serving objectives they would never consciously choose to support. The perfect labyrinth that Vivienne had achieved represented more than technical accomplishment. It embodied a philosophical approach to human control that treated consciousness as an optical phenomenon that could be manipulated through proper understanding of reflection, refraction, and dimensional geometry. Her mirror systems had proven that reality itself was far more malleable than conventional wisdom acknowledged, while demonstrating that the most effective prisons were those that their inmates never recognized as confinement. The dimensional spaces that existed within Vivienne's mirror network had become a parallel universe where she could exercise absolute control over subjects who remained eternally beautiful, forever young, and completely dependent on her will for their continued existence. Her transformation from craftsman to goddess of reflection had been achieved through systematic application of optical principles that enabled her to transcend normal limitations of space, time, and physical reality. The systematic expansion of Vivienne's imprisonment operations had required developing a comprehensive understanding of London's social hierarchy that would enable her to identify targets whose disappearances would generate minimal investigation, while maximizing the psychological satisfaction she derived from collecting beautiful and accomplished women. Her position as proprietor of the city's most exclusive optical gallery provided perfect cover for studying potential victims, while establishing the trust necessary to lure them into situations where dimensional trapping could be accomplished. Lady Margaret Fairfax had been selected for imprisonment not only because of her renowned beauty and wealth, but because her recent inheritance of vast estates had made her the subject of numerous social pressures that created vulnerability to offers of escape into worlds where such concerns could not reach her. Margaret's known fascination with optical illusions and advanced technology had made her an ideal candidate for experiencing Vivienne's most sophisticated mirror systems without suspicion about their true purpose. The consultation that would seal Margaret's fate had been arranged through mutual acquaintances who presented Vivienne's invitation as an exclusive opportunity to preview optical innovations that were being considered for the upcoming Great Exhibition. Margaret's competitive nature and her desire to be associated with cutting-edge developments had made her eager to accept what she believed was a privileged glimpse into the future of decorative arts. The mirror chamber that Vivienne had prepared specifically for Margaret's entrapment represented the culmination of years of research into psychological profiling and optical engineering that could exploit individual personality traits to create personalized prison environments. The configuration had been designed to appeal to Margaret's particular vanities, while gradually drawing her consciousness into dimensional spaces where her identity would become permanently integrated into Vivienne's reflection network. Margaret's experience during her final visit to Reflection Gallery had begun with a private viewing of mirrors that seemed to enhance her natural beauty while showing her reflections that appeared to exist in luxurious settings, far grander than any earthly palace. As she gazed into these idealized versions of herself, the boundary between observation and participation had gradually dissolved until she found herself existing within the reflected world while her physical body remained motionless in the gallery. The trapping process that claimed Margaret had been refined through extensive experimentation to minimize the psychological trauma that might interfere with long-term imprisonment, while maximizing the subject's sense that their new existence represented an improvement over their previous circumstances. Margaret had experienced her transformation as a voluntary transition into a realm where her beauty would be eternal, and her social position unchallenged by earthly concerns. Within Vivienne's mirror dimension, Margaret had joined the growing collection of imprisoned consciousness that existed in a state of enhanced awareness, but complete powerlessness to influence events in the physical world. She could observe new visitors to the gallery while understanding with crystal clarity that she was witnessing the same process that had claimed her own freedom, yet her attempts to warn potential victims were perceived only as unusual lighting effects that enhanced rather than diminished the gallery's reputation for creating magical experiences. Countess Eleanor Pemberton had presented a more challenging target due to her suspicious nature and her extensive knowledge of optical science gained through her amateur studies in natural philosophy. Eleanor's imprisonment had required developing new approaches that could overcome her analytical mindset while exploiting her scholarly curiosity about advanced optical phenomena that promised to revolutionize understanding of light and perception. The approach that Vivienne had devised for Eleanor had involved presenting her mirror systems as scientific instruments designed to test theoretical models about the relationship between consciousness and reflected light. Eleanor's intellectual vanity and her desire to be associated with groundbreaking research had made her willing to participate in what she believed were carefully controlled experiments that would advance human knowledge while ensuring her safety through proper scientific protocols. Eleanor's entrapment had been accomplished through a mirror configuration that exploited her confidence in scientific methodology to override intuitive warnings that might have enabled her to recognize the danger she faced. The chamber had been presented as a device for measuring the optical properties of human consciousness, with Eleanor serving as both researcher and test subject in experiments that would supposedly advance the frontiers of natural philosophy. The realization that she had become a prisoner rather than a collaborator had come too late for Eleanor to resist the dimensional forces that were drawing her consciousness into Vivienne's reflection network. Her scientific understanding of what was happening to her had enhanced rather than diminished the horror of recognizing that she was experiencing phenomena that transcended the natural laws she had spent her life studying. Within the mirror dimension, Eleanor's analytical capabilities had made her a valuable resource for other imprisoned consciousness that struggled to understand their circumstances or maintain coherent identity in an environment where normal physical and psychological reference points no longer applied. Her scientific training had enabled her to develop theories about their situation that provided some comfort to fellow prisoners while confirming that escape through conventional means was impossible. Princess Katerina Volkov had represented Vivienne's most ambitious imprisonment yet, as her royal status and international connections created significant risks if her disappearance were to attract attention from foreign governments or diplomatic authorities. The princess's capture had been motivated not by personal objectives, but by a commission from sources that Vivienne preferred not to identify. Clients whose resources and influence enabled them to request services that transcended ordinary criminal enterprises. The method selected for Princess Katerina's elimination had involved exploiting her well-documented fascination with advanced optical technology and her desire to acquire unique decorative pieces that would enhance her reputation as a sophisticated patron of innovative arts. Her imprisonment had been presented as a private viewing of experimental mirrors that were being considered for installation in royal palaces throughout Europe. Princess Katerina's entrapment had been accomplished through the most sophisticated mirror system that Vivienne had yet constructed, incorporating elements that created not only dimensional imprisonment, but also the illusion that the princess was continuing to fulfill her royal duties while actually existing as a consciousness trapped within Vivienne's reflection network. This innovation had enabled her disappearance to be concealed through the appearance that she was traveling extensively on diplomatic missions that required minimal public appearances. The international implications of the princess's imprisonment had required Vivienne to develop new methods for managing the political consequences of her actions while maintaining operational security that would protect her from investigation by authorities whose resources exceeded anything that domestic law enforcement could provide. The successful completion of this commission had established her reputation within certain circles as capable of eliminating targets regardless of their social position or protection. The most complex aspect of managing multiple imprisoned consciousness had been developing systems that could maintain the psychological stability of subjects who retained full awareness of their situation while being completely powerless to influence their circumstances. Vivienne had discovered that prolonged isolation could lead to madness that would compromise the aesthetic value of her collection, requiring careful attention to providing social interaction and intellectual stimulation that would preserve her prisoners' personalities. The solution she had implemented involved creating a shared dimensional space where imprisoned consciousness could communicate with each other while remaining under her complete control. This social environment had enabled her victims to maintain psychological coherence while providing Vivienne with opportunities to observe their interactions and study the long-term effects of dimensional imprisonment on human consciousness. The hierarchy that had emerged among Vivienne's prisoners reflected their previous social positions while being modified by their adaptation to circumstances that bore no resemblance to earthly existence. Princess Katerina had naturally assumed leadership among the imprisoned consciousness, while Eleanor's scientific expertise had made her a valued advisor whose theories about their situation provided framework for understanding their transformed existence. Margaret's role within this strange society had evolved to encompass aesthetic appreciation and cultural refinement that enhanced the quality of life for all prisoners while serving Vivienne's desire to maintain a collection that reflected the highest standards of beauty and accomplishment. Her contributions had included organizing entertainment and intellectual discussions that prevented the despair that might otherwise have compromised the psychological value of the imprisoned consciousness. The expansion of Vivienne's collection had continued throughout London's social season, with each new imprisonment adding to the complexity and sophistication of the dimensional space that housed her growing number of victims. The gallery's reputation for providing transformative experiences had attracted increasingly prestigious clients, whose disappearances required more elaborate cover stories, while providing Vivienne with subjects whose quality enhanced the overall value of her collection. The perfect prison that Vivienne had created within her mirror systems had become a parallel society where beauty, intelligence, and social accomplishment were preserved in eternal stasis, while serving purposes that transcended the victim's original earthly objectives. Her success had demonstrated that the most effective forms of imprisonment were those that provided genuine benefits to the imprisoned while serving the captor's objectives in ways that made resistance psychologically impossible. The reflection prisoners who inhabited Vivienne's dimensional spaces had achieved a form of immortality that fulfilled many of their earthly desires while completely eliminating their agency to pursue independent objectives. Their existence had become a testament to the possibility of creating perfect control over human consciousness through proper application of optical principles and dimensional manipulation. The first person to recognize the true nature of Vivienne's operations was Clara Whitmore, a young optical engineer whose advanced mathematical training had enabled her to detect patterns in the gallery's mirror configurations that conventional observation would never reveal. At 26, Clara possessed both the technical expertise necessary to understand complex optical systems and the investigative instincts required to pursue dangerous knowledge despite the personal risks that such curiosity might entail. Clara's involvement in the case had begun when her sister Mary's mysterious disappearance from Cambridge had led her to investigate the circumstances surrounding her sister's final research project under Dr. Blackwood's supervision. The official explanation that Mary had left suddenly to attend to family emergencies had never satisfied Clara, particularly since no family emergency had actually occurred, and Mary had never contacted anyone after her supposed departure. The investigation that Clara had undertaken required gaining access to Dr. Blackwood's research records while avoiding the attention of anyone who might be monitoring inquiries into his work with Vivienne Ashford. Her credentials as a legitimate optical researcher had provided cover for examining academic papers that referenced dimensional optics and reflection theory, while her apparent scholarly interest in advanced mathematical models had deflected suspicion from her true investigative purposes. The breakthrough in Clara's research had come through analysis of mathematical equations that Dr. Blackwood had published in obscure academic journals, formulas that described optical phenomena which conventional physics suggested should be impossible to achieve. The calculations had revealed theoretical frameworks for creating dimensional distortions through precisely configured mirror systems, while also indicating that such effects could be used to trap consciousness in localized reality bubbles. The correlation between these theoretical models and the recent disappearances of several prominent women who had visited Reflection Gallery had created patterns that Clara could not dismiss as coincidental. The mathematical precision required for the effects that Dr. Blackwood's equations described could only be achieved by someone with extraordinary expertise in both optical engineering and dimensional physics. Clara's attempts to investigate Reflection Gallery directly had been complicated by the establishment's reputation and the social prominence of its clientele, factors that made overt inquiry inadvisable while creating circumstances where she would need to gain access through legitimate means. Her solution had involved presenting herself as a potential customer interested in commissioning optical installations for her own research facility. The consultation that would prove to be Clara's most dangerous undertaking had taken place in Vivienne's private workshop, where she had been invited to examine mirror systems that supposedly demonstrated the latest advances in dimensional optics and consciousness manipulation. Clara's technical background had enabled her to recognize immediately that the equipment she was viewing transcended anything that contemporary science could produce through conventional methods. The realization that she was in the presence of someone who possessed capabilities that exceeded the boundaries of known physics had been both fascinating and terrifying for Clara, whose scientific training had prepared her to appreciate the theoretical implications of what she was witnessing while understanding that such power represented threats that conventional authorities would be ill-equipped to address. Vivienne's recognition of Clara's unusual knowledge and her connection to Mary's disappearance had led to a conversation that began as professional discussion, but gradually evolved into something approaching mutual recognition between practitioners of sciences that operated beyond normal academic constraints. Clara's questions had demonstrated comprehensive understanding of dimensional theory that impressed even Vivienne, while revealing dangerous knowledge that could threaten the security of operations that had remained undetected for years. The philosophical justification that Vivienne had offered for her imprisonment activities had drawn upon concepts that challenged conventional understanding of consciousness, identity, and the relationship between individual autonomy and aesthetic perfection. Her collection of reflection prisoners, she had explained, represented an advancement in human experience that enabled subjects to transcend the limitations of physical existence while achieving forms of beauty and awareness that earthly life could never provide. Clara's attempts to argue for alternative approaches that might achieve similar benefits without resorting to imprisonment had been met with patient demonstrations of why conventional methods could never produce the levels of perfection and control that her dimensional systems could achieve. The women who had been integrated into her mirror network had gained eternal beauty, enhanced consciousness, and freedom from earthly concerns that most people could only dream of experiencing. The turning point in their conversation had come when Vivienne had offered to reunite Clara with her missing sister by enabling her to join Mary in the dimensional space where consciousness could exist in enhanced form while contributing to aesthetic experiences that served purposes beyond individual desires. The possibility of seeing Mary again had been both compelling and terrifying for Clara, who understood that accepting such an offer would mean abandoning any hope of exposing Vivienne's activities while gaining access to knowledge that conventional science could never provide. But Clara's scientific training had prepared her to recognize that no amount of theoretical benefit could justify the systematic imprisonment of human consciousness, regardless of the enhanced experiences that such captivity might provide. Her refusal to accept Vivienne's philosophical framework had been based not only on ethical objections, but also on recognition that dimensional imprisonment represented a form of existence that was fundamentally incompatible with human autonomy and dignity. The revelation of Clara's intransigence had prompted Vivienne to demonstrate rather than merely describe the consequences of challenging someone who possessed capabilities that transcended conventional understanding of space, time, and consciousness. Clara's choice had been reduced to willing participation in dimensional imprisonment or experiencing the trapping process as a hostile action that would provide valuable data about resistance mechanisms while adding another valuable subject to the collection. The mirror chamber that Vivienne had prepared for Clara's imprisonment had been her most sophisticated creation yet, designed specifically to overcome the resistance that someone with advanced optical knowledge might be able to mount against dimensional trapping techniques. The configuration had incorporated elements that could neutralize theoretical understanding while exploiting the emotional vulnerability that Clara's concern for her sister had created. Clara's experience during the imprisonment process had been unlike anything that previous victims had encountered, as her technical knowledge had enabled her to understand exactly what was happening to her consciousness while being powerless to prevent the gradual dissolution of her connection to physical reality. Her awareness of the optical principles involved had enhanced rather than diminished the horror of recognizing that she was experiencing phenomena that her education had taught her should be impossible. The transformation that had drawn Clara's consciousness into Vivienne's mirror dimension had been accomplished through optical effects that overwhelmed her analytical capabilities while gradually integrating her awareness into the network of imprisoned consciousness that provided social structure for the dimensional space. Her reunion with Mary had been both joyful and heartbreaking, as she discovered that her sister had not only survived her imprisonment, but had adapted to circumstances that provided intellectual stimulation and social interaction that compensated for the loss of physical freedom. Within the mirror dimension, Clara's technical expertise had immediately proven valuable for understanding and potentially improving the systems that maintained their imprisonment, though any attempts to escape or sabotage the dimensional structure would immediately alert Vivienne to resistance activities that she would not tolerate. Clara's knowledge had enabled her to appreciate the elegant complexity of their prison, while recognizing that the optical principles involved were so advanced that conventional escape methods would be completely ineffective. The integration of Clara into Vivienne's collection had completed what she privately considered her masterpiece of dimensional imprisonment, a gathering of consciousness that included representatives of the highest levels of beauty, intelligence, and social accomplishment that contemporary society could provide. The interactions between these enhanced beings had created a micro-civilization within the mirror network that served aesthetic and intellectual purposes that transcended anything that earthly existence could offer. The expansion of Vivienne's operations beyond individual imprisonments to encompass systematic collection of exceptional consciousness had established her as something approaching a goddess of reflection, wielding powers that enabled her to reshape reality according to aesthetic principles that prioritized beauty, perfection, and transcendence over conventional moral considerations. Her mirror network had become a parallel universe where consciousness could exist in enhanced form while serving purposes that benefited both the imprisoned subjects and their captor. The perfect reflection that Vivienne had achieved through her dimensional imprisonment system represented the ultimate synthesis of optical engineering and consciousness manipulation, creating possibilities for human experience that challenged every assumption about the relationship between mind, body, and reality itself. Her success had demonstrated that conventional understanding of consciousness was inadequate to address the possibilities that advanced optical science could provide. As Clara settled into her new existence within the mirror dimension, she had begun to understand that resistance to their circumstances might be less important than adaptation to possibilities that earthly existence could never have offered. The eternal beauty, enhanced awareness, and intellectual stimulation that characterized life within Vivienne's reflection network had compensated for the loss of physical freedom while providing experiences that transcended anything that conventional reality could provide. The final reflection had revealed that the boundaries between prison and paradise were far more ambiguous than Clara's earthly education had suggested, while demonstrating that the most profound transformations were often those that challenged fundamental assumptions about identity, consciousness, and the nature of human experience itself. Vivienne's triumph had been complete, not through force, but through creating circumstances that made resistance psychologically unnecessary. The mirror maze that existed within Reflection Gallery continued to operate indefinitely, attracting visitors who sought beauty and transcendence while occasionally adding new members to the dimensional community that had evolved within its optical depths. Vivienne's legacy would endure as long as human vanity created demand for experiences that promised perfection while concealing the true price that such transformation required. The reflection prisoners who inhabited her dimensional spaces had achieved a form of existence that fulfilled many earthly desires, while serving purposes that extended far beyond individual objectives, proving that the most effective forms of control were those that appeared to be gifts rather than impositions. The Mirror Maze murderess had created more than a criminal enterprise. She had established a new form of reality that challenged every assumption about consciousness, identity, and the relationship between beauty and freedom.